The stone chamber had been sealed for 25 centuries when excavators finally lifted its lid, and what they found looked like nothing. Blackened stones. A scatter of ash so faint it seemed ready to dissolve in the mountain wind. No gold, no weapons. Just the remains of a small fire, buried at nearly 10,000 feet on a wind-scoured plateau in western China. But that ash contained a chemical fingerprint that shouldn't have survived 2,500 years. And it shouldn't have been there at all. Scientists ran it through the lab anyway. The result changed what that ash meant. Before this video ends, you'll understand what that fire really was. Why the cannabis they burned appears to have been unusually rich in psychoactive compounds, and how a Greek historian, writing around that same era, may have described a ritual eerily similar to what happened on that mountain. The Pamir Plateau is not an easy place to be human. Thin air, brutal winters, a landscape that looks less like a valley than the roof of the world. And yet here, in the Jirsankal cemetery, archaeologists found dozens of burials built with strange, deliberate architecture, circular mounds ringed with stone, black and white patterns laid into the ground, structures seemingly designed to be viewed from one exact angle. Wooden boards buried beside the dead may once have formed a harp-like instrument, and scattered among the burial goods, small wooden braziers scorched by fire, clearly used to burn something in full view of the mourners standing graveside. So what was burned? For a long time, nobody could say. The plant itself was long gone. 25 centuries of mountain weather had seen to that. What survived was only chemistry. That's where the investigation really begins. A team led by researcher Yimin Yang, working with international collaborators including archaeologist Nicole Boivin, extracted residue from 10 of the braziers and ran it through gas chromatography-mass spectrometry, a technique sensitive enough to pull a molecular signature out of charred wood after all that time. The result, published in Science Advances in 2019, was unambiguous. Cannabinoids. But finding cannabis was only half the mystery. The harder question was why this particular cannabis was worth burning. Not all cannabis is equally psychoactive. Many wild and hemp-like populations contain relatively low levels of C. So where did people on a remote, oxygen-starved plateau, with no laboratories, no breeding programs, nothing but observation and trial, find plants rich enough in psychoactive compounds to leave a signature scientists could still detect today? One possibility is that the plants had been exposed to environmental conditions or selectively chosen by people that favored higher concentrations of those compounds. Whether the people at Jirsankal understood that, or simply learned through generations which plants gave the strongest smoke, is something historians still debate. What the evidence does support is careful, not sensational. The chemistry suggests the plants being burned were richer in psychoactive compounds than typical hemp, and burned with clear intention. And that intention is where the story stops being about a plant and starts being about people. This didn't happen at a party. It happened at a funeral. Picture mourners gathered on a wind-battered ridge, a small fire lit beside a body wrapped for burial, smoke curling into air already thin on oxygen and settling, slowly, into a haze over everyone present. Altering consciousness at the edge of grief is not a new idea. Incense in cathedrals. Substances burned at wakes across cultures and centuries. Here, on this mountain, was physical evidence of that same impulse, built directly into a burial ritual, long before anyone wrote a word of it down. Except someone did write something eerily close to it down. Around the same era that these people were burying their dead, the Greek historian Herodotus was writing about something remarkably similar, a nomadic people called the Scythians, who threw cannabis onto heated stones inside small tents, and in his words howled with pleasure at the smoke that rose around them. For generations. Many modern readers dismissed this as travelers' exaggeration, the kind of colorful detail ancient historians were notorious for inventing. Then, Jirsankal came out of the ground. A burial site from roughly the same era, wooden braziers, cannabis residue, and evidence that the smoke had been deliberately inhaled. The old traveler's tale and the buried stone were suddenly describing something remarkably alike from two completely different directions. That doesn't mean the case is closed. The chemistry proves cannabis was burned deliberately, and that the plants contained unusually high levels of psychoactive compounds, but it doesn't prove these were the exact people Herodotus met. Or that his account describes this specific grave, rather than a related community somewhere along the same route. Good evidence resists the urge to tie every thread together too neatly. What it does support is something bigger than one tribe's identity. The Pamir Plateau sat along the earliest arteries of what would later become the Silk Road, a punishing corridor where goods, languages, And rituals moved between China, Central Asia, and beyond centuries before that name existed. A funeral practice found here may not have been local at all. It may have traveled a very long way to reach that mountain, which is the part of this story that outlasts the plateau itself. We tend to treat drug use as either a modern indulgence or a footnote nobody wrote seriously about. Jirsankal argues the opposite. Altering the mind at the edge of death, at the edge of thin air and thinner oxygen, may be older, more deliberate, and more universal than we've allowed ourselves to believe. A community with no writing, no laboratory, and no chemistry textbook still found and possibly refined one of the most potent psychoactive plants available to them. And they used it exactly where it mattered most. The people who lit that fire disappeared. Their names disappeared. Their language disappeared. The ritual itself disappeared. But the chemical evidence survived, locked inside a handful of scorched wood, waiting for a laboratory that wouldn't exist for 25 centuries. The stones remembered what the people could not write down.